Welcome to part 3 of the tutorial. This segment's going to introduce you to Live 2D's Cubism, and this is the software that's actually used to animate and rig and export into Face Rig for final use. Yay! And this part's going to be mostly just an introduction and setting up the geometry mesh that is mapped to each of the images. So let's get started. Okay, so what you want to do to get this thing finally started is you're going to open up the folder where you have that Photoshop file saved, and all you're going to do is basically drag the Photoshop file straight into the Live 2D window. You're not going to make a new project or anything. You're just going to drag and drop it straight into the window. One thing to note is if you do get an error, this is where you'll run into the issue if you didn't get rid of any paths or mirroring that happened in the Photoshop file. You're going to get an error and it's not going to work. But assuming that that your drawing is nothing but basically regular layers, no correction layers or anything like that, they just have to be standard drawing layers and basically no frills, it'll work. And you'll drag and drop it straight into the window and you have your character. Now you'll see down here, this is bit of the chest floof that I ended up as I moved it when I was drawing, but I ended up dragging it off the canvas in Photoshop, so you actually don't see it anymore. But Photoshop actually still remembered that it was there because it is a Photoshop file and not an actual exported image. So now that you have this character in here, you're going to see over here you have all your layers that you created. They're all named appropriately. And you're going to see these boxes and everything. Next step is going to be, I mentioned the canvas that it's all going to get mapped to, to where the ears are all going to be split apart and everything. And every little layer is going to have its own spot on this final texture. And you're going to do that by going to modeling, texture, edit texture atlas. In here, I'm basically running with the default settings. Can I go back or do I need to restart it? Bam. Texture size 2000 now. And just because I want this one to be a little bit nicer, I think this is going to be my main streaming avatar. It's just an example. It wouldn't really matter too much. For the most part, we're just rigging it up. But because I'm going to be using it, I want it to look nice. I've got lots of space here. So I'm going to up the resolution as much as possible. And I don't think it matters too much to be super exact on the sizing and everything. It's more just how many pixels you want to allocate to each piece. And for the most part, we're just kind of scaling up the parts that we care about the resolution. Some of these things don't matter too much, like let's make everything a little bit bigger. This isn't the most efficient use of your space, but allocate just slightly more space to each of these pieces, and it does look like as I scale them up, it is still matching the original Photoshop file. So I may be allocating a little bit more space than necessary to these. Do that, and I still don't know what this is. It doesn't seem to be related to any of the layers specifically, so it'll be interesting to see if that becomes an issue. But there we go. We got this laid out a little bit differently. We're allocating a little bit more space. I don't think it's going to help much, but at least we're now, at the very least, using as close to the original Photoshop file as possible. I think the original file was 1300 by 1300, so the top of the file would be there. So yeah, this chest piece here is actually larger than it was in the Photoshop file, meaning there's going to be a little bit of quality either loss or aliasing to match it. But anyway, we have our texture atlas created, so this is how everything's laid out. That's how it's going to be saved. Hit OK, and now we have that. So now this is actually mapped and able to be used. Next thing we want to do is I'm going to take all of these pieces and put them in the right order. Obviously the eyeballs need to be between the eyelids, and I want to sandwich the eyes I'm going to put the eyes under their eyelid layers, and those are going to be just above the eye whites, so that we kind of have everything kind of in the order they're supposed to be. We got the eye whites behind everything. That's going to be the overall clipping layer. We have the left eye under the two left eyelids. We have the right eye under the two right eyelids. And then we have the eye rims to kind of cover up everything and kind of hide some of the seams. Another thing that it's looking like is the transparency might have been maintained. I could be wrong, but I think this is a canvas color button. No? Okay. I thought it was. But that's fine. As I said, I am new to this program. I've just kind of got everything kind of working, and people seem to like what I've got, so I thought I'd make a tutorial. And so next thing, we've got everything. Everything looks like it's pretty much in the right order. We've got the eyes behind everything. Now we're going to start working on these clipping layers. So what we're going to want to do is, now right now, so I can grab one of these eyelids. The eyelid is technically not inside the eye socket, and what we want to do is make it so that the outer part of this eyelid, as it's animated, stays within the realm of the eye, and you don't get any of this like line sitting outside the eye socket. And you're going to do that with clipping. To do clipping, what you're going to do is you're going to select your eye whites layer, and expand this part right here. In the inspector, you're going to get the mesh ID for the eye whites, and then inside each of the eyelids and the eyes themselves, you're going to see this clipping ID. You're just going to paste that in. We're going to get a little, not quite an error, but it's more of a warning that I think this feature is going to be adjusted a little bit later. But it's not going to be an issue right now. And so we've pasted in, oh wait, I think I messed up. Yep. Kind of forgot. So we got left eyelid, or eyeball. When you add these clipping IDs, make sure to hit enter, or it may not register. There we go. Okay, so now all our eyelids are stuck within the realm of the eye sockets. And now, it's a little weird with the eyelids in this kind of halfway squinted mode. But for the most part, they'll be open or fully closed, and we're going to animate that in a bit. But as you can see now, the eyelid is stuck within the realm of the eye white. And if I actually hide the eye rim, you're going to see this is why we created this eye rim, is so that you see this weird seam right there. Now, there's a little bit you could do in terms of cleaning it up and trying to make it look nicer. But you're going to need some really harsh edges and some playing with some layering. I think one way is maybe if you were to cut out the eyes, kind of like how I did it with this time, where I cut out the mouth to stick the inside of the mouth behind everything. Now that I think about it, you might be able to alleviate some of this clipping issue if you was to put the eyes behind the head layer itself. But in this case, I use a simple line around the outside to kind of mask everything. That doesn't look too bad. And then when for the most part, when you're actually animating, it's going to be fully open or fully closed. And when it's fully opened, it doesn't look bad at all. And when it's closed, it's just going to be when you're blinking and quick animations between. So no huge worries. Now, one thing I am noticing is maybe I should have... I was trying to be a little more painterly with this design. So there was a lot of transparency. And the transparency is bringing up some issues. And one thing I am noticing is because the line isn't fully there, you are seeing a little bit of that weird edge lighting. So it might be a little bit of an issue, but at the same time, when it's in a stream format, it's going to be zoomed out kind of like this. So it's going to be invisible for the most part. So I'm not super concerned about it. Now we get into the actual rigging, because I think all the clipping and everything is finally completed. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of work from our way from outwards, inwards in terms... Actually, don't want to get ahead of myself. Right now, each of these layers is a solid image. So when you can't actually distort or bend any of these shapes, they're just flat shapes, and sure, you could animate the squashes and stretches and everything, but that's not going to do a whole lot. What you're going to want to do is actually create a geometry mesh that it's actually going to animate based on, and you're only going to want to do this to the pieces that are actually going to be distorted and deformed. The program itself does seem to have a very good automatic mesh generator, and that's what these buttons here are for. So I'm going to basically just go through my list and pick what I want and kind of the resolution of the mesh that I want to use. And you're going to use these tools. This one, yeah. Let's go with like the chest. You could go in here, hit this button, you're into your mesh edit, you got your tools right here. And you're basically just dropping in pins, and you can see it's kind of creating a geometry to match it. And that's what it's going to do everything, all the distorting and everything based on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the automatic generator. Now, the automatic generator is probably another source of inefficiency if you're a little hard on system resources and you're a little concerned. This mesh generator is one place where you could probably save some stuff. The other thing is, in the free version, I do believe you're stuck to the presets, and you don't get to create your own. I made this eyelid one for like super high density because I'm trying to like do the subtle distortions of the eyelids. And that's what I did with my original shard mesh. But I think I also discovered with a little bit of time, you don't need as much geometry as you might think. So don't be too concerned. With the body, I think we're basically doing some general squashes and stretches, and you can see the automatic mesh that was generated isn't perfectly symmetrical, but that's not going to be a huge deal with the final product. A lot of this is going to be automatic. I'm sure if you went in and paid good money and had professional riggers make your model, they'd probably go in and manually create the mesh, but in the instance of this, I'm going to let the automatic system work pretty well. These are some settings that you could play with, and that just kind of edits the, whether it decides, this boundary margin is basically how often around the outer edge you want it to automatically create a piece. And we're going to leave this to little. And you don't have to click anything to confirm it. As long as that's set, it's there, you're good to go. And you can actually leave this window open as we go through the next pieces. The chest floof, that's also going to have a simple distortion. The center of it is just going to get pulled to the sides as I rotate my head, because there is no body tracking in Face Rig. So we're going to add some little deformation there. That looks good. Obviously, keep an eye out for any major anomalies, but for the most part, you're fine. Some things like the inner mouth, that's not going to have any real distortion. Now, if you're getting really advanced, you may do a little bit of distortion to kind of get the tongue to feel like it is 3D as the mouth is opening and closing. But in this case, I'm going to leave it nice and flat. And so we don't actually need a mesh for it at all. One other thing is if you want to be super careful, you may want to, kind of like how we did the eyelids with the eye whites, you may want to clip the teeth to the inner mouth, just so that the teeth are always stuck inside the mouth regardless what's going on. But I'm not going to do that unless it seems like it's going to be an issue. The back hair. Okay, so this is where I actually tried out a little bit of an experimental feature. And that's where I created the front of the hair separate from the back of the hair to hide behind this ear so I could turn the ear without having to distort the hair to kind of clean up that seam right there. And we'll see how that goes. But ultimately the back of the hair, that is going to need some distortions, so we're going to add that one to a little bit of deformation. The ears are also going to be fairly simple transforms. They're just going to be bending for the most part, maybe a little bit of squash and stretch. So we're going to go to little on that one as well. The right ear, we're going to do the same thing, little. Lower teeth, those aren't going to get distorted at all. They are going to be squashed and moved a little bit out of the way as the mouth closes, but you're not actually going to be bending the jawline, really. So we're going to leave that one alone. The head base, this one is going to get moved because this is where our main jaw movement is. So we're going to actually want to go with this one on standard, just because the actual jaw movement is a slightly more advanced one. One thing you could do is if you want to save a little bit on resources, you could make the top of the head and the jawline as two separate ones, or use the manual mesh generation and just increase the density of the mesh in the jaw area while leaving the head fine. And actually, I think I might try that real quick. So we're going to go to little, let's go back to standard. And then we're also going to go into our mesh edit. And we're just going to drop a bunch of pins right on the outer edge of this jawline right here. And this is just because this mesh is what it's going to eventually use to distort everything along. So we're going to try and make our mesh match this outline just a little bit. I'll also give you a little bit of a example of this generators tool. And then we're going to see as it was going, created these fake outlines, and that's just because it does need to still create everything in terms of triangles. So you need to fill in these little outlines. We've got slightly better density of these points in the jawline, just because that is where, as you're opening and closing your mouth, that's where it's going to be distorted. All right, that seems pretty good. Now I've got a nice density down there, while the rest of the head is fairly standard. Move up to the eye whites. The eye whites, as I said in the earlier video, these aren't going to be distorted at all. If you were doing some harsh rotations to the head, I could see where you might be doing some squashing and stretching, and you may actually be moving the eyes relative to one another. In that case, you would need to add a mesh to them, but I'm not going to be doing that. Same thing with the eyes. They're just simply going to be moving, but they're not going to be distorting. The eyelids themselves, this is where probably a lot of your resources are going to end up being used. But I'm going to go with the automatic setup again, and we're going to go for heavy. And actually, that's not very good because it's not creating much density in the middle there. It's creating a lot on the outside, but not in the middle. Interesting. You know, I might use my preset. My preset was basically cranking everything to the max so that we could get maximum distortion around the eyelids. And you're gonna see that as when we actually go to animate this, it may be a little bit of a system resource hog trying to use these eyelid setups. I kind of came to the conclusion that you didn't really need it, but I think I'm going to use it this time. When you're actually running Face Rig, it doesn't seem to impact performance much at all. It's more just in this program that it becomes an issue. And also the other thing is note that with using the presets, it is creating tons of geometry out here where it's not really going to matter because this is all just solid blue. The eye rims themselves, those aren't going to change either because they're going to be locked into the same as the eye whites. The eyebrows, I don't think I'm going to do anything crazy with the eyebrows. I think I'm going to have slight adjustment in the top, up and down, but I don't think I'm going to animate them independently of one another, and they're not going to be distorting. But I know that as you add things like expressions and such to the program, you may want to give those a mesh for their own individual distortion. You'll see as we get into the animation kind of what goes into that. The upper teeth aren't going to be animated, and the upper muzzle, now this is going to get slightly distorted just with pulling the middle portion of this slightly to the left or right as you tilt your head, just to give the feeling of a little bit of rotation. And we're going to use a standard mesh here for that. And then the front of the hair, that's also going to be pretty standard. You could probably get away with little as well. Actually, I think I will go with little. Just because for the most part, as the head rotates or I do anything crazy, it's really just going to be kind of these tips that are pulled in one direction or another. But overall, the full thing is going to be sitting pretty normal. So there we go. We've got all our meshes created. Everything that's going to be animated has its own framework built. And now we can move on to rigging it. This concludes this part of the video. In the next segment, we're going to move on to actually starting to rig up the character and begin animating it. So stay tuned.